Hey guys, I'm Sam, that's the Sun Eater, and this is a YouTube channel where we look at how to use solar and batteries to add range to an old EV. Today we're going to be talking about what types of batteries are the best to use for a portable EV charging station. Is it the lead batteries that I have in here now, or these 4 lithium-ion batteries that I got off Craigslist? We're going to do a very comprehensive look at both banks of batteries and which one's going to work better for the setup in terms of longevity, battery bank capacity, weight, and the overall value in each battery bank and the costs, and try and find out which one is going to ultimately work better for our EV charging station. The results of this test will probably not be a surprise to people who have a lot of experience with batteries and inverters and just all this kind of stuff in general. In fact, a question that I get from a lot of experts is why I went with the lead batteries to begin with. They're heavier, they don't have as much capacity, and I can understand their confusion. Basically, it was because I designed all this on paper before I ever built it in real life, and I didn't have a 100% guarantee that it was even going to work. My initial investment was about $2,200, which was a lot for me, and it's kind of scary to take that gamble on whether or not it's going to work, and that's going to turn this vehicle into something that I could use as a functional vehicle to make my commute. And at the time, the much cheaper lead batteries, those are like the cheapest new batteries you can get, was the highest investment I could justify without having any kind of proof of concept. But now it's 5 months later, I've made my commute over 60 times in this vehicle using this system. I'm gaining a lot of confidence. I have my proof of concept now. So it's time to go back to the drawing board and look at, are these lead acid batteries going to be the best choice for a portable EV charging station? Are we going to get the best value from the lead batteries, or are we going to get more functionality, range, and overall value out of the more expensive lithium batteries? Before we can test that, I've got to pull all these batteries out of the system that are in there now. You've got to do these battery capacity tests under a uniform temperature. Obviously, I can't get that outside, so I'm going to pull them inside to do this test. I'm going to hook them up to a meter that will determine the overall capacity of the entire battery bank. And we're going to charge them up to 100% full and slowly drain them down to the lowest voltage that each of these can safely be at. And that'll let us know the overall total capacity of the battery banks. That'll be the first comparison that we do. Now, when I installed these in there, I took great care to make sure that they would not move at all while the vehicle was driving. They're Velcroed on 3 sides of them, and they're strapped in. So it's going to be a little bit of a project to get them out of there. I will say at this point, you know, all these months later, that the securing method worked very well. These batteries have not shifted an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and get them all pulled out of there, get them inside and hooked and fully charged, so I can hook that meter up to them and see what the capacities are. Okay, an important side note. Before we can disconnect our batteries from our charge controller, we have to disconnect the solar input. Your batteries kind of power the computer in this little charge controller and make sure that it's doing everything it's supposed to with that power. If you disconnect the batteries and leave the solar plugged in, you can fry this thing. So we're going to disconnect the solar, then disconnect the batteries. Okay, so we pulled the 4 batteries out of the car. We hooked them up to our Noco Genius charger and got them charged up to 100%. And we're going to hook these 4 batteries in parallel up to our inverter and use it to run that space heater right there. And in between the batteries and the inverter, we're going to put a little power meter that's going to track how much power goes out of these batteries, and we'll run them all the way down, and this tool right here will give us a exact measure of how much power came out of these batteries to run that heater. Now when we pull it out of the box, they left the wires over here just kind of sheared off. So we have to go and get our lugs here. These are 8 gauge 3/4 inch lugs that will fit right over the edge of these wires once we strip the insulation off, and I'll crimp those things on there, and then these little eyelets will hook over the battery bank and the inverter. That'll tell us how much juice is coming out of those batteries. Okay, so we got our little eyelets soldered on to our power meter. We got our power meter hooked up to our battery bank, and the power is running through the power meter from the batteries into our inverter and running our little space heater here. It's pulling about somewhere around 700 or 800 watts. I've got a kilowatt meter hooked up to the front of our inverter too, so you can see it's pulling right around 725 watts there. So we'll be able to see how much power goes from the batteries to the inverter and how much power goes from the inverter to the heater. This one's going to have a little lower reading on it because this inverter is not 100% efficient, but watt hours is what we're looking for. It's right there at 57 or so. So we're going to just set the camera on this thing, let these batteries run down, see how much juice we can pull out of there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop the test there. 11.7 volts represents a 80% depth of discharge for those batteries, which is about as much as you can drain them without doing severe damage to them. If we look at our total watt hours pulled out, we're at about 3,071 watt hours, or 3.07 kilowatt hours pulled out of the batteries. So how does that compare to what came out of the front of the inverter? We got about 2.94 kilowatts out of there. So why does that say 3.07 and that say 2.9? That's because the inverter is not 100% efficient. That the difference between that 2.94 and the 3.07 is what was lost internal to that inverter as it turned the 12 volt power into the 120 volt AC power that the space heater is designed to work off of. So what are our takeaways from this? Well, after about 130 cycles, these lead batteries have lost about 17 to 18% of their overall capacity. The day that I got them, they should have been, if they were delivering 80% of their original capacity, that would have been 3.8 kilowatt hours. That's fallen off to around 3.1. That loss of about 18% after 130 cycles at pretty much full discharge falls more or less in line with the specs they give on their website. I'll see if I can put a chart in here that relates the life cycle of the battery to how far you're discharging it. So that's the first takeaway, is that they've lost 18% of their capacity already after only about 8 months of me using them, or about 130 cycles. The other big important number, of course the most important number, is how much juice are we getting out of them. 2.95 kilowatt hours is what the meter on the inverter said, and that turns into about 12 to 13 miles of drivable range in your EV. So 12 to 13 miles of range in your EV. Now let's run the exact same test with our lithium ion batteries over there and see what that number on that inverter on the kilowatt hour meter goes up to, and see how the energy capacity of these two battery banks compares. Okay, we've got everything set up and we're running the exact same test that we did before with the lead batteries. We've got our space heater, inverter, lithium batteries this time, and we're going to run the exact same test and see if we can get more power out of these used lithium batteries than we could out of the lead batteries that are about 8 months old. This is kind of the drum roll moment of truth that anybody who's ever bought a large battery bank used has experienced. Because when you're kind of trusting the integrity of the seller, you generally don't have these tests to drain all these batteries can take 3, 4 hours, 5 hours to run. And most people that are selling you these batteries are not going to be willing to just sit there and twiddle their thumbs, wait for you to run the test, and then decide afterwards whether you want to buy them or not. If you're buying batteries over eBay, or you're buying large banks like this one in person, the potential is there for you to get hosed by somebody without any integrity. If you can, when you buy used batteries in person, bring this setup, something like this with you, a large amperage pull device, an inverter, and your kilowatt meter, so you can test the batteries that you're buying before you buy them. These batteries used go for about $400 a piece, so there's a lot obviously invested there. I was very fortunate, and I had a generous patron of the channel help me out with a donation that allowed me to be able to purchase and experiment with these batteries. And if it all pans out, these will be a much better fit for our system than the lead ones back there that we have been using. And there's lots of other parts like that that I'm sure would allow us to tweak and adjust a solar-powered battery portable onboard EV charging station and make the whole thing work better. I'm limited at the rate at which I can experiment with new parts, like the little power meter here, is limited by how much I can convince my wife to let me spend on this. So I was very thankful to have this donation. But in all seriousness, all this is financed by just whatever, 50 or 100 bucks I have left at the end of the month after I pay all the bills. And if the solar car research and development project is something you want to contribute $1 a month to, that is an option that you have. I do have a Patreon page. I'll put a link in the video description. And that's not like Sam's beer fund. All that money goes toward experimenting with new parts like this and seeing if we can find something that's going to allow us to build a system like this that gives us even more power, more efficiency, and more miles at the end of the day with our electric vehicle. Okay, so we've got everything set up. We got 3 kilowatt hours out of the battery bank at the back, so we're hoping to get at least that out of these. 4 would be great, 5 or 6 is stellar. If we get 6 kilowatt hours out of this battery bank here, that means these things are pretty much at about 95% capacity, almost brand new. And since they brand new, these batteries go for about $1,300 a piece. If we can get 5 kilowatt hours out of this bank right here, I'll be ecstatic. All right, check back with you in a few hours. Okay, so we've passed the 3 kilowatt hour mark. That's more capacity than our lead batteries had, but our voltage is dropping off. Looks like we're down to about 40% charge left in the lithium. So we've at least broken even. Let's see how much further it'll go. Okay, we passed the 4 kilowatt hour mark, but our batteries are down to 12.89 volts and counting, and this is where the voltage in lithium batteries kind of starts to fall off a little quicker. So I'm going to see if we can get 5 kilowatts out of here. We're already 4.5 miles past, 4.5 miles of range per day for our electric vehicle past what we were at with the lead batteries. Okay, so we're going to cut the test off there. 12.5 volts represents about a 90% state of discharge for these batteries, which is as low as you can take them without potentially damaging them. And let's go look at our reading off our kilowatt meter. Remember, this was 2.9 with the lead batteries, and we're up to 4.62 kilowatts now. That represents about a 60% increase in power capacity, switching from the lead to the used lithiums. My watt meter here got reset halfway through the test. That's why it's only reading 3.7 there. I couldn't get these little 4-inch wires to stretch from one terminal to the other, so I had to use this little extension wire, and I went in halfway through the test and tightened that little nut there, and I guess that broke the connection for 1 second and reset that. But we got a good reading from the front, that 4.62. We can multiply that by 105% to get the increase, to get the input into the inverter. So we know we've got a 60% increase in capacity, but what's the weight comparison? We're putting these in a vehicle, so we've got to look at the weight too. Hopefully you can tell from this camera shot that these batteries are almost exactly the same size. The dimensions on them are very comparable. And when we put the lithium battery on the scale, we get 43 pounds. And when we put our lead battery on the scale, there we go, we get 67.5, even though those two batteries are almost exactly the same size. So that's a difference of about, what, 24 pounds per battery. The bank of the 4 of these lead batteries weighs 270 pounds. The bank of these 4 lithium batteries, even though we're getting 60% more power out of them, they weigh 40% less, 100 pounds across the entire bank, less than our lead acid. So that weight reduction is not only going to take a lot of strain off the suspension of our vehicle, but it's also going to probably give us even more fuel efficiency because we're not carrying that extra 100 pounds around with us. Okay, so we've looked at the charge capacity of the two banks, we've looked at the weight of the two banks. Now let's look at the cycle life of the two. Basically, how many days or months or years can we use each of these two different types of battery banks to charge our vehicle before the batteries have degraded to a point where we can no longer use them in our portable charging station. I'm going to put up some spec sheets from the manufacturers of these two batteries, so because they've got graphs that really show us a good indication of what their lifespan is going to be like. Okay, this is a graph that relates the capacity of the battery, how much energy we're using per day, to how long the battery is going to last us in terms of days. This is for our Renogy Blue, the lead acid batteries. And as you can see, if we are only using about 30% of the power of that battery bank every day, these batteries can last about 1,700 cycles. But that's not really realistic for a mobile car charging station. You're probably using closer to 60 to 70% right over here. A little less in the summer when you're getting more solar, a little more in the winter when you're relying a lot more on your batteries. But if we continue this trend down, we can see that even if we use these batteries to where only, 40% or 30% of their capacity is left, we're only getting about 600 cycles out of these lead acid batteries. If you watch my last episode, Why Solar Powered EV Batteries Last Longer, you'll remember that we're actually cycling these batteries about 1.5 to 2 times a day, just based on how that car charger is clicking on and off and charging our car up for us. So even though we might be able to get 600 or 700 cycles out of these lead batteries, if we're cycling it twice a day, that means that those lead acid batteries are going to be shot like maybe 1.5 years if we're lucky. And at that point they're going to be degraded all the way down to like 30-20%. They're not really going to have much resale value left. We've basically trashed them. Now let's go look at our lithium batteries, those green batteries we were using, and see how the longevity of those compares. We go on their website, look at, they've got all the data and the specs for these batteries, and we get just the exact same chart we were just looking at that relates the capacity to the number of cycles we're running. So if we follow this chart down, that's your line for how many cycles if you keep your battery bank real hot, 45 degrees Celsius, that's what, 110 degrees Fahrenheit or so, compared to 23 degrees Celsius, that's about 70 degrees. So if we're discharging our batteries in between that line, somewhere around 80, 85 is probably what they'll be in the back of our car, and we run it all the way out here to until the batteries are down to 50 or 60%, we can see we're going to get in between 2,700 and 3,000 cycles out of those lithium batteries. Even at 2 cycles a day, that comes out to 5 years of usage. Almost 5 times longer than our lead batteries is how long those will last. Okay, so our lithium batteries, are going to give us about 7 to 8 miles a day more range. They weigh about 100 pounds less, and they're going to last us 5 to 6 years, as opposed to the lead batteries that'll last 1, maybe 2 if we're lucky. So probably not a big surprise to most of the people who are watching this who already know about batteries, but the lithium's a pretty clear winner, and per kilowatt hour, our used lithium batteries are only costing us about $325 per kilowatt hour, whereas our lead batteries are costing us about $250 per kilowatt hour. I'm going to try and put up a chart right here that just lists all the different statistics of these two battery banks, so you can do a quick comparison, a quick visual comparison. And now that we know that lithium's the clear winner, how do we get these batteries and how do we get them at a good price? I found these batteries at a scrapyard. I'll put the link to the Craigslist ad in the video description. They actually came out, 120 of these batteries came out of a battery bank for a electric Frito-Lay delivery truck, which I thought was pretty cool. The guy had it there at the scrapyard. It had been gutted and taken apart. He had some other odds and ends. But I guess it seems like these batteries have already been used for about, based on the degradation that we're seeing, they've already been used for probably 1,500, maybe 2,000 cycles, somewhere in there. So the company used that electric delivery truck for whatever that would be, 200,000 miles. And then they sold it to the scrapper. And these batteries still have plenty of juice left in them for our application. When possible, if you're buying used batteries, meet the seller in person. You could have one of these batteries that has 1/4 of a kilowatt hour of capacity, and you could have one of them that has 6 or 7 times that, and from the outside they would look exactly the same. The damage, the wear and tear on these batteries is invisible. And that's why it's so important whenever possible when you're buying one of these, buy them in person, talk to the seller beforehand, be like, look, I don't mean to offend you, but I have to do a test on these. Please have them fully charged. And when you go out there, bring your inverter and like a hair dryer, something that you know is going to pull 500-600 watts would be perfect, and just set it up and run the whole test through your kilowatt meter, and you can find out what the capacity of that battery is before you buy it. That's how you're going to protect yourself from getting taken advantage of. If you're buying them off eBay, look for sellers that either have a good return policy or have lots and lots of good reviews. If you're ordering them used offline though, there is an element of risk because the damage is invisible. On a final note, if the lithium is so much better than the lead batteries, then why would anyone buy lead? In applications like an electric vehicle where you're cycling the battery every day, you're cycling it a lot, batteries with, like lead ones with the shorter lifespan, don't really make a whole lot of sense. But if you're somewhere like you have a grid that goes out for a week or two, if you're a PG&E customer in California, and for a month or two a year, whether or not you'll have grid power is anybody's guess. you're not going to need to cycle your battery bank a whole lot. You only need your batteries to be there really for about 3 or 4 weeks a year. So buying a lead battery bank for that application would be a lot cheaper than the lithium one, and it would work because you're not cycling it a whole lot. In applications where you do not need to cycle your battery bank more than 20 or 30 times a year, where you're using it only 20 or 30 days a year, a lead battery bank will work just fine for you and be a little cheaper than the lithium one. If you're going to be using it on a daily basis, cycling it every day, you want to try and find a good deal on your lithium batteries. Okay, that's all I got for today. That's it for the lead acid battery to lithium battery comparison. I got to go rebuild the car now because I had to take pretty much everything in the back of it apart to get those lead ones out. I'm excited to get these back in there because those are going to add at least, I think, 7 to 9 miles a day to the range that I'm able to charge while my car is parked. And I really think that'll make my Nissan Leaf drivable year-round. As it is right now, I've been having to go back to the truck on days when it's really cold and I lose a lot of range out of the Leaf. Once you've driven electric, you're really just not going to want to go back to gas. I don't want to go back to paying for gas on days when it's too cold. I've just been forced to do it because I didn't have the range. But I think with these in there, I'll be able to drive the Leaf year-round. So I'm excited to get them in there and rebuild the car. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it informational and educational. Stay with us. We're going to do a lot more episodes. We got one on aero wheels for the Nissan Leaf coming up. We've got one on the clear coating the individual solar cells to the skin of the vehicle and turning the rest of the skin of the car into a solar panel. So essentially the entire skin of the vehicle is going to be a solar panel. A lot more coming up. Stay tuned and I'll see you next time.